everybody. Welcome to Your Personal Health. I'm Jeff Harrison, along with Dr. Kim and Dr. Burris. Welcome, you guys. How you doing?
Good, doing good.
Hey, if you just joined us, we were discussing, or they were discussing, some of the other items that we're dealing with here in the or actually around the world, and we're talking about the what do you call it? The Delta. Yeah,
Delta
and
variant.
you had said something before we went off the air on the other show that you hadn't seen anyone positive test in using rapid test in quite some time. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we still offer the rapid and the PCR and a rapid PCR through one of the labs we use, and we haven't seen a positive in probably a month and a half. But yesterday, we saw our first positive, and earlier in the week, we noticed that people are, we're doing, probably 3 or 4 more tests than we normally do, and so people are worried because it's not, that they're worried. It's someone told them they are positive, or they found out they were somewhere that someone was positive, and now they need to get tested. So, I don't think we're going to get the surge that we did previously, but I do think we're going to get a little bump. And then, some of the, outcomes, whether it's, people get sick and hospitalized and or die, are going to be unavoidable. But some of those we absolutely know could have been avoided if people had gotten vaccinated or been careful. So.
Well, just curious about the, you talk about vaccinations, and there was some concern, or let's say some speculation early on that we didn't know if we could out vaccinate this pandemic because it was so widely spread. But it looks like here, especially here in the Coachella Valley, maybe even in California and other parts of the world, we actually have out vaccinated it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, there are different levels of control of infectious disease, and there's eradication, and we're definitely not there where it's just gone. Like, say, smallpox, it's gone. That one was eradicated. But this one is really more, I would put it in the sort of category of currently controlled. So we still have little pockets of transmission occurring, but it's not taking off like a raging wildfire because of the vaccination rates. So I think, depending on what your hope was to achieve with vaccination, we've either succeeded or we're close to it.
And you guys had shared in COVID-19 update, and you want to go back and check this out because it's interesting to see what percentage of the cities here in Southern California have actually reached, or what their vaccination levels are, or even a percentage of at least one. And you had heralded the cities here in Coachella Valley have done very well. Can you give us kind of an overview of that?
Yeah, what we saw is that we've overall done really well in the Coachella Valley. I mean, we're really close to almost every city being well over 70% with at least one shot, and definitely over 50% fully vaccinated. So we're way ahead of the national average, which is great. And we still do see some discrepancy in some of our more rural areas, especially the smallest areas. Their vaccination rates are quite low. So we still have a few outliers, but overall, especially within the valley itself, the sort of DHS to sort of Mecca area, we've really, we really should congratulate ourselves a bit on pulling together as like a whole community.
What do you think this means in overall? Does this mean, hey, what, we're past it, we're really in this zone of safety, and we can kind of resume life again and do the gatherings and things like that? Are we at that point yet here in the Coachella Valley, in your opinion?
I think we're close with caveats. So I would say in general, we're in a pretty safe moment. But if you personally are not vaccinated, you're not very safe, if that makes sense. So it's almost like there's a few killer bees flying around out there, and we still have some people walking around dressed as a flower, right?
I love that.
And so if you're the flower, it's still a little bit more dangerous. But for everybody else who's wearing suits of armor, the bees aren't going to bother them much.
I would add a little caveat to that. So if you're hanging around with the people who look like flowers, the bees are going to be around and you might get stung, versus those that aren't dressed like flowers, you probably aren't going to encounter the bee. So I think that's the problem, is we have two separate populations that are intermixing, and we have reached that point where there are more vaccinated than unvaccinated, but still we're still encountering those, and that's why they have these little hot pockets in the valley that have, we know of several places that have had little outbreaks in the valley, and so that impacts their workers and their people. And I haven't even looked up what the recommendation is if you've been vaccinated but you've been exposed. What are you supposed to do?
Yes. So the recommendations, if you are fully vaccinated, which means 2 weeks past your second dose or your last dose, that you do not need to quarantine if you are exposed to a known case. As long as you're not symptomatic. And you're not required to test either. If, however, you develop symptoms, then you should do both. You should quarantine, get tested, and make sure that you don't have it. So those are the current recommendations. But we'll see what happens as the Delta variant gains speed, and if we see a lot more breakthrough disease, that recommendation might change again.
And I think people are so conditioned that they probably will get tested anyway.
But I will say, for me personally, I still wear a mask into higher risk situations. So that's things like the grocery store. It's indoor, crowded environment. And the reason I do that is, even though I'm vaccinated, I really don't want to have to miss 10 days of work. So to me, that little extra protection, just to kind of prevent that possibility of picking up a mild case of it, it's worth it for me. Will I still be doing this next summer? Probably not, but we'll see.
I did notice that it's, or I find it a little bit confusing now when I walk into a store, a retail outlet. Am I supposed to wear a mask? Am I not supposed to wear a mask? I mean, if I go in the bank, you have to wear your mask. I just went into a place earlier that for fast food before I got here, and they required a mask, but then there are other places that don't. I'm just curious, that's creating a little bit of like, hey, I better keep my mask just in case kind of thing. What's the protocol on that? Is there a standard across that says, hey, we're in a Coachella Valley, look how well we vaccinated, and we don't really need to have a mask?
What a loaded question. Oh man. There is no state requirement for masking, but there may be business specific requirements. So for instance, most healthcare facilities still require masking of everyone that's in them. There may be some businesses where they're still asking people to wear masks. I would anticipate they're having some customers push back on that now, because it's no longer mandated by the county or the state. But there may be a reason why that particular business wants to retain that practice. So there's still going to be some individual businesses who are maybe a little slow to give up the required masking. We're kind of in this in between too, because there are still some employee requirements for masking that are different. So you'll go into some businesses and all the employees are required to wear them, but the customers aren't.
Yeah.
So we're in a weird transitional hodgepodge of a moment.
Yeah. Officially, there's no official answer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it does put potential friction amongst the patrons. It puts it at risk. The reason I say that is because yesterday I went into a locally owned coffee shop, and it had a nice big sign on the door that said, if you enter, you must be wearing a mask. And a woman walked right in front of me. She had her phone and she was talking on the phone, and she didn't have a mask on, never tried to put a mask on. Everybody in there, including myself, we all had our mask on. She does her business at the counter. No one even says anything to her because she's so busy on her phone. And then she leaves, and I'm like, wow, how do we handle that? Just kind of like let it slide and say, okay, I got shot twice. I got my mask on. I'm good to go. Just ignore her.
That's what I do at this point. I also don't try to stand as close as possible to those people and breathe their air. So, I'm kind of like, the risk is low. I'll give them some space. But honestly, I'll tell you, if somebody's coughing and sneezing now, I probably would turn around and leave the store.
Yeah.
I'm still a little bit gun shy about that, but
Well, I was at the gas station the other day, and I, was minding my own business, had my mask on, wanted to pay so I could pump, and the person behind me didn't have a mask, and the employee's like, "Can you put a mask on?" And they had this conversation, arguing, and I'm like, "I just want to get gas. Can you let me pay so I get gas?" And that's when it starts impacting me. I'm like, if you want to do you, that's fine. I wish I could say I was the Good Samaritan, but no. After 2 minutes, I turned around and said, "Can you please put your mask on so I can get gas?"
yeah.
But so, I mean,
one day this too shall pass and we won't be having these conundrums. But I do feel for the employees or the store owners who are trying to keep their employees safe, or their customers, or, they're balancing all the different,
right.
Demands. And, I would just say, if you're going to go into somebody's place of business, respect what their wishes are. And if you don't like it, get in and get out as fast as possible. But I would say if we could all just be respectful of whatever that business is requesting, and it makes sense just to be like that as a zero politeness.
Courtesy. Just
Yeah.
courtesy. Yeah. Well, speaking of safety, let's switch gears now and let's talk about safety in the desert. I mean, this is not uncommon to see 110 plus degrees outside. And since the show is called Your Personal Health, I want to talk about this because we've had some really extended periods where it seems like we've also already had some unusually high temperatures. And I know you mentioned in the last show up in the Northwest, they've had some brutal temperatures up there that, quite frankly, we're poised to take care of. They're dealing with 104 and 108. And we have to quickly remember they don't have air conditioning. A lot of people, there's no place for them to go except in retail stores. And so for us, that's normal. This is kind of a normal day. But we have had some temperatures up in that 120, 123 range. And I want to talk about, get your health directions on how does that impact us? What should we be looking for? I mean, because it doesn't take long, as hot as it is outside, to all of a sudden realize, hey, I'm in trouble. And what would I do? Because I haven't had enough liquids. I've sweated like crazy. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the basics of how to handle ourselves in the heat.
One thing that I think that people need to remember is that it really doesn't take long to have your internal body temperature rise to the point where you're in danger. And if you're dehydrated, that happens faster. And if you are in an arid or very low humidity environment that's windy, that happens even faster. And one of the things that first happens to people when they get into this sort of overheated state is they get a low-grade headache and they start to feel a little nauseated. So those are your really early warning signs that things are not okay. And here in this type of weather where it's that hot, and especially if you're in the direct sun, that can happen within a matter of 5 minutes. So people often underestimate how quickly they can get into trouble. And this is what we see all the time with people who come to the valley from outside the valley, but we also see it in our population who maybe is used to certain outside activities. Maybe they're used to hiking or going for walks early in the morning. And now instead of it being in the 70s when they're going for that walk, it's 95. And that temperature difference can take what used to be a very doable exercise and turn it into a dangerous activity. So that's what happens early. As your temperature continues to rise, your body tries to sweat to lower your temperature by evaporative cooling. And when you stop sweating, that is a critical sign of imminent problem, because now your body has basically lost its ability to try to lower its temperature, and you're going to rapidly increase your core temperature from there. And when that core temperature gets to about 106, 107, that's when your brain starts to shut down and you actually start to denature proteins in your brain. You will have seizures and permanent brain damage, and then total organ system collapse. So these types of things happen all the time in the Coachella Valley. It's just that you don't hear about them really on the news. But we do have people who die every year in the Coachella Valley from exposure. And we have a fair number of people who end up in the hospital or in the emergency room from heat exhaustion. So it is a serious problem, and it can happen much faster than people realize.
Yeah, when I was in the prison system, we would see it routinely in the summer because they don't break their routine and they are working out or playing basketball or soccer. It didn't matter how hot it was. And they would routinely come in cramping, vomiting, in pain, and we would have to cool them down and give them IVs and slowly hydrate them. And sometimes we'd have to send them to the ER, but it's routinely it happens every week. So, people, and these are young, healthy.
Yeah. Not who you would consider real, and a lot of times that's the problem, is people are really quite healthy and fit, so they don't consider themselves to be at risk. Also, whatever level of hydration people are used to getting, when you raise the temperature 20 degrees, you need to massively increase it. And that's not just water, but electrolytes as well. So, and you can't do it after the fact. And that's one of the things that gets people into trouble, is maybe they're used to going out for a morning run, but they're kind of starting their morning dehydrated from the night before. So if it's 95 degrees out, you might not be able to just get up, chug 8 ounces of water, and go for an hour run. You might need to actually get up half an hour earlier, get 24 ounces of water in, let it get into your system before you go for that run. So there are ways to sort of mitigate that heat for people who are fit, but this is not the time for someone who's not used to exercising in heat to start. So if you are not used to exercising in heat, I would definitely look for types of activities where you will not be as hot. So either indoor activities or swimming outside. And then anything you do should be out of the direct sun. So you could wait till the sun's past the mountain in the evening to go for that run. Even at the same temperature, not having the sun directly on you will help.
I mean, a very common story in the Valley, because it's happened to me, is 3 years ago, my buddy and I said, hey, why don't we go play golf? This is the best time to go play golf because the rates are so low. So we went to Silver Rock. It was $40 to play, I don't know, $30. It was, we went out at 11 in the morning, and I was drinking water beforehand, and I recognized it like hole 12. I'm like, I got to stop, because if I don't, I'm going to get in trouble. And I was pounding the water so much so that it was sloshing in my stomach. And so I learned you can't put it in fast enough for your body to absorb if you get behind. Yeah. So, that requires IV level hydration, not, through the guts. And so you really have to start, like Dr. Burris said, if you know you're going to be out, like an hour before, start drinking the water so your body can absorb it in a as fast as it can, but at the rate where it actually is effective. So
yeah, and knowing that this may be a problem if you're going to do an activity like golf, which is a little longer activity, you want to sort of bring a way to cool yourself down. So maybe bring a little ice chest that has ice in it, with some wet washcloths in there so you can pull them out and cool down a bit with that. Maybe plan to take a break and sit in the shade for a while, bring a little personal fan. There are little ways, if you think ahead and sort of incorporate them into your activities, you might prolong the time you're able to do an outside activity. But if you get to the point where you're pretty nauseated and feel like you need to throw up, it's time to get out of the heat.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit, because for a long period of time, 5 years, I was doing some work with the Coachella Valley First Tee organization, and it would not be uncommon to see some issues out there, and also in the golf industry. As long as 40 years in the golf industry, we had some issues like that. I want you to tell us, hey, now if we recognize that there's a problem, and let's say, for instance, somebody else is out there playing and they come in and we know they're in trouble, what should we do immediately to try to help them? Is it a 911 call? Is it a, like you said, put some, cold towels on them, get them near the air conditioner? What do we do to make sure we can try to get these people past this danger point and lower their core temperature?
So if somebody comes in and they're not making sense, if they're throwing up, or if they're not sweating, those are reasons to call 911. If someone just comes in and they don't feel good and they're all sweaty and they're bright red, then you don't necessarily need to call 911, but you still need to start your cooling activities. So with those more severe people, you would call 911, and then you would sit them down, ideally in someplace cold. And you would, if you have water, I would pour it all over their clothes, because really what you want to do is cool their core temperature down. The other place that you get a lot of bang for your buck with cooling people is their head. So pouring water over their hair so that their hair's wet. And then if you have one, turn a fan on. So you've basically doused them with water and turned on a fan to help them evaporate and cool off. You're basically kind of turbocharging the sweating process for them. That's one way. If they're not throwing up, if they're able to tolerate giving them something to drink, some Gatorade, some water, lemonade, anything that they can keep in. And then if they're not getting better, or if they seem to be at all getting worse, it's just probably better for them to go to the ER, because sometimes people, especially in a recreational golf setting, they may be on other medication or may have underlying health problems. So, if they're showing any of those serious warning signs, or if they're not improving after about a half an hour, I would probably recommend getting them over to the ER.
Is it safe to say that we know there are some beverages that actually dehydrate us, or they actually don't hydrate us? It's not uncommon, not 11 o'clock in the morning when you're playing golf. People will a lot of times have beers out there when they're drinking or out there playing. How much does this affect their overall body hydration? Is that something that takes away the moisture? Does it help it? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I have good news and bad news. And the bad news is alcohol in general does dehydrate your system. And so basically, if you have one alcoholic drink, you're now behind one drink of water. So if you had a beer, you'd have to drink the equivalent of 2 beers to catch up, or 2 waters, sorry. Yeah, don't do that. The good news I have is that caffeine, often blamed for being a diuretic, actually doesn't have much of a diuretic effect for people who drink it every day. So if you are a daily caffeine drinker and have tea or coffee, that beverage actually counts as hydration for you. If you never drink caffeine and you happen to have one, it's not going to hydrate you very much because that will have a bit of a diuretic effect. But if you're a daily caffeine drinker, you get to count that towards your hydration.
And a diuretic is just something that draws water out of you and you pee it out.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, guys, this is very helpful. As I say, as the temperatures continue to get higher, we're, as you said, we're 6 months through the year. I think we have probably 3 more months of potentially hot temperatures here in the Coachella Valley. Be safe out there, be smart. Probably one of the things I really liked what you said is if you're planning on going out for a hike or you're going to go for a physical activity, hydrate before you go. As much as you said, a half an hour to an hour before you get out there. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's something I have to be honest, I'm guilty of because I start an activity in the morning between 5:45 and 6 a.m. outdoors. But what I have noticed is I'm drinking somewhere between probably 60 and 100 ounces of water over that next 2 hours. But I'm standing, I'll take breaks and I'll stand in the shade, drink, and let my body cool off a little bit. So I think I'm going to start adding that process. Although I do have a cup of coffee before I go down there, so maybe I'm not so far off track. But really hydrating before I go down there, who knows? Maybe it'll help my game. I don't know.
It does actually improve performance.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start drinking water tonight before I go to bed.
The other thing we want to just say real quickly is you got to be careful of the sunburn. So sunscreen, cover yourself up, hat, because the sun will really damage your skin, and not just the short term. You have skin cancer problems down the road. And then also the surfaces are hot. Things you touch, don't ever run out barefoot. Even if you think I can make it, it's going to be, in a split second, you can get some really nasty burns on your feet. And we have some friends and that happened to our daughter like 3-4 years ago. So be very careful.
And your pets. Don't forget your pets' feet. Yeah.
Let's talk just a brief second about this whole idea is, there's those, I don't know if they're myths or they're facts about what SPF, if you go above that, it's a waste of. I find myself, we're putting on 50 SPF now. I used to watch, I think we probably all did those comic things where people are just all white because they're putting 50 SPF on it. We thought it would never happen. Here it is in our lifetime. We were putting 8 and 10. Is there a level where it's counterproductive? It's really not helping us, or just the fact that you're putting sunscreen on helps a lot?
The thing to remember about SPF is that number is sort of like a ballpark, and so it assumes that you've put on the appropriate amount of sunscreen, which most of us don't. And it assumes that you haven't sweated it off. And it assumes that nobody rubbed it off or water didn't splash on you. And it assumes that that basically it was done perfectly. And we know for most people, you're not going to get anywhere near that level of protection. Also, it just means that you burn later, not that you don't burn. So, an SPF 15 buys you 15 times longer for burning. But some of us pale people will burn after 3 or 4 minutes. So that 15 SPF only buys us 45 minutes in ideal circumstances. So in our real life daily usage, that SPF 15 might only get us 20 minutes sunburn free.
Wow.
And some of the studies have, suggested that higher levels of SPF past 15 don't actually deliver as much as they say. So even though it says SPF 15, it's not really 3 times better than SPF 15 if for that SPF 50. However, I will say that as a consumer, if I'm easily sunburned, I'm not going to say, 15 is good enough. I'm probably going to reach for that 50. But I'm probably not going to pay an extra $10 to get a 70 because I know that the benefit is kind of low. I myself look more for sunscreen that I think is going to be reef safe. Everyone has the things that they look at. Some people want to avoid certain chemicals. So I usually tell people the best SPF is shade. So SPF or sun protective UV blocking clothing, sunglasses, hats, and then the sunscreen is sort of that last line of defense, or in a situation where you can't wear that clothing. So people often ask me about the best SPF for children, and I usually tell them it's a rash guard. So we want to utilize the clothing that we have available to us now. We've got some great high-tech sun protective gear available. I would say definitely look into those, reach for those first, and then add the sunscreen of your choice to that.
Yeah, there's a reason why those lifeguards have the zinc oxide on their nose and it's just white, and they're like, I don't care if I look silly, because that is going to give them the best protection, because they're there, for 10 hours, 8 hours. So
well, this has been incredibly helpful, you guys. And if you're just joining us or you didn't catch the whole program, I would recommend you go back and listen to it, because we're talking about how to stay safe when it's hot outside. And we've got a few months left of really high temperatures here in the Coachella Valley. And unless you can go underground like a snake or a rodent, you probably want to do some things to try to keep yourself safe. As you just heard, could be protective clothing. It could be a combination of protective clothing and the sunscreen. And then what happens if you want to go out and you have enough time in advance? How should you properly hydrate? And if you didn't hydrate, what are some of the signs that maybe the heat is getting to you and you should take precautionary from, hey, I should stop, to I might need to call 911, or someone might need to call 911. I think is just as important for you to go out. I think of that old saying is, if you're going to go diving, never dive alone. If you're going to go out for a hike, please don't go alone. And
right.
Dog is not your companion, another human, because as you said early on, in 5 minutes out in that sun, when it's 100 plus degrees outside, it can start changing our core temperature pretty rapidly. And we don't have a lot of sunshade out on those bump and grind trails out there. Or I would be out there more often if there were some big tall trees blocking the sun. No, I probably wouldn't. But anyway, just be safe out there. Go back and watch this. And also, it's probably not a bad idea to share it with someone you care about. So Dr. Burris, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for being here. Any last thoughts about the heat besides make sure your air conditioning is working that we want to take with us?
Yes, the other thing I have to say is that heat really affects people with certain underlying medical conditions very badly. And so if you have somebody, if you know a friend who's maybe in that category, who really has a hard time in the heat, it might be a great time to kind of grab some groceries for them, or you check in on them, make sure they're doing okay. It's one of those times where if you do have a medical condition that's affected by heat, it's pretty brutal through the summer.
Yeah, there's some medications also when you get dehydrated, they just amplify the effects of being in trouble.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say, shameless plug, is that the best thing would be is if you could call someone, right, your provider, to see, hey, I'm feeling like this, can we, and if their provider could even say, hey, come on in, we'll see how you're doing. And that's kind of the the clinic model that we have is not just for dehydration. Is, we want to take care of our patients, so we're very accessible. You can reach us after hours if you need to, if it's urgent. And, that's perfectly a scenario where someone says, I'm not feeling so well. They can, call us, text us if you're a member of our clinic, and we can together figure out, okay, what needs to be the next step, so that it's not just a go to the ER or you're okay. There's a lot more degree of subtlety. Just like as a, golf instructor, you have a lot more tools in your bag. If I would, call you, hey, Jeff, about this, rather than going, well, what does the Golf Channel tell me to do? And so, I would rather have Jeff in my speed dial. So, but so really that, if you're in trouble, 911, but, if you can call your provider, and hopefully they can point you in the right direction as well. So
I love it. Well, stay safe out there, everyone. And again, if you are not a member of the Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care Program, the information is on the screen now. Just call them at 760-642-5549 and find out all the benefits that are available to you. As it was just mentioned, calling them after hours, actually sending or making a phone call, and they will answer your phone call. And it's not uncommon that I just have to share this one quick thing is, early on in my membership and the whole COVID thing, somebody said, hey, I tested positive. I think you should go get checked. And I called Dr. Kim and Dr. Burris, and they said, come in. And I said, when? Right now. It wasn't like, okay, come in 2 weeks. It was like, come in right now. But I think that's just the way they do it. If I said, hey, I've got this something, can I come in? Yes, come in right now. And I don't want to oversell them that it's always a right now, but so far it has been for us and my wife. So I just want to encourage you again, 760-642-5549. It is worth everything because it's your health. You get one shot at this, folks. And, when it says check with your physician before you start this routine, you might want to check with them before you go out there and start taking hikes and things of that nature. So guys, thank you so much. Any last words before we sign off?
We just want to thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure. You do a phenomenal job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I knew I could get a shameless plug out of that, but all kidding aside, guys, thank you so much. And we'll see you again next Wednesday. Remember, Wednesday, even though it seems like, hey, 1.5% infection rate and that kind of thing, or transmission rate, seems like, okay, this COVID thing is over. It's important to know where you stand because of things are always changing. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock from 3 to 3:15, catch them on a COVID-19 update. And then right after that, your personal health. Yeah, we go a little bit longer because I like to ask a lot of questions. So I think it's important to, and I appreciate them hanging in here, answering these questions, because today's subject, heat, it's not just, yeah, it's hot outside, drink more water. There's layers and layers of this that could actually not only keep you healthy, but also save a life. So I want to thank them very much for doing this today, and just be safe out there. Keep your hat on, sunglasses, and wear a little sunscreen, and get inside where it's cool. We'll see you next week, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.